How are ya? I'm First Warning meteorologist Eric Burris. This is a special edition, like Coffee Talk, but instead we're talking all things science, all things Crew 6. We are in the First Warning Weather Lab, and we are here to talk about that puppy, the Falcon 9. This Falcon 9 standing high and tall over Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. And just a few hours from now, should be lifting off, bringing 4 souls to the International Space Station. We're going to talk a lot about it, talk about the vehicle itself, hopefully get into some of the more nerdy elements with this, and get you ready if you're staying up late with us. Now, if you're not, I can understand that, and I'm not going to fault you. It's a very, very early liftoff. We're targeting 1:45 tomorrow morning. I did the morning show today, so believe me, I will be right there with you on the struggle bus, trying to make it through. But here we are. It's a gorgeous night here at the Kennedy Space Center. We're going to have all the elements covered. First, let's take a look and see what's doing. The First Warning Weather Lab taking measurements, and we're looking good. 70 degrees the current temperature. There's our location. We are at the vehicle, I'm looking at the vehicle assembly building. It's right there. Here at the historic Kennedy Space Center. 70 degrees. It's a nice light breeze, but well within the constraints of the Falcon 9 rocket. Before we get in too deep to things, let's just look at the overall forecast for tonight's launch. Obviously, the weather has been quiet. It should continue to be quiet through this evening. That's the good part of things. The latest forecast from Space Launch Delta 45 over at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, giving it a 95% chance of good weather. You gotta like that. You gotta like those odds, right? Only a 5% chance of what we refer to as violation, okay? The only issue that we're going to be watching for is, at least here at the surface, a couple of additional clouds, the cumulus cloud rule, because remember, as this spacecraft accelerates to a speed of 17,500 miles an hour, just think about that. 17,500 miles per hour. That's what it takes to get to orbit, okay? And as it's accelerating, if it gets into a situation where it's running through cloud cover, what you end up with is an issue where static electricity could charge up and generate a lightning strike. So there's that to contend with. So for right now, we're looking good. Wind shear in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, not a concern. Booster recovery weather. This is first stage is going to attempt a landing offshore of the Carolinas. That weather looks good, but the crew abort weather is a low to moderate, okay? For right now, it's okay, but that's definitely going to be a piece of the puzzle that we're going to be discussing. So all of these things to be discussed here this evening. All right, and I see so many of you joining, and I first off say good evening to all of you. Thanks for hanging out. Lots to talk about here. It's going to be a 6-month-long mission. This is the 6th crew rotation with SpaceX to the International Space Station. Remember, the International Space Station was built going back to the shuttle days. So it's kind of a, it's kind of a really long process. Think about how long ago the shuttle was retired. Prior to SpaceX taking launch responsibility here in the United States, we were sending NASA astronauts over to launch with Roscosmos over off Kazakhstan using the Soyuz capsules. And now we're able to launch our crews on American soil, which is amazing because it's our own backyard. But one of the astronauts launching is with Roscosmos, okay? What's also interesting, so it's a crew manifest of 4. You've got 2 NASA astronauts. You've got a representative, an astronaut from the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and then you've got an astronaut from Roscosmos coming from Russia. Of course, we all know that relations with the United States and Russia are not exactly the most warm and fuzzy right now. But going back through time, minus, of course, the space race, that's been an opportunity to show that in all things there is still unity, and I think that that's very important between NASA and Roscosmos. So that's a optimistic, at the very least, that's an optimistic way to look at the world as we know it. All right, a couple of questions before we get in too deep. I don't know how long I'll be on for. The baby's fighting sleep. Taylor, good to see you this afternoon. Clear in New Smyrna Beach tonight, Kristen says. Going to stay awake for it. Very cool. And by the way, sidebar, there's also a set. This is something so interesting. My photographer this evening, Pat Gribben, our news operations manager, has covered these going all the way back to the shuttle days. It's kind of an interesting little world here because what we've got is a crewed mission, which is a big deal. But what is so interesting is if I look out, and this is, and we're not moving the camera, of course, but if I look out my window, directly out my window, I'm looking right at what you're seeing there. That's Launch Complex 39A. If I look just behind me, I see the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and there is another Falcon 9 on stand there. And what we're looking at is a double early morning, the crewed mission goes up. Just a few hours, it's like 12 hours later, there's a Starlink mission expected to go up from the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on a cargo mission. And nerd fact, by the way, this Coffee Talk, well, it's not Coffee Talk, this Facebook Live, Twitter Live, YouTube Live is actually being broadcast over Starlink. So kind of a fun little nerd thing. All right, so that's where we're at. Let me just check in here. Rosebud, 6 people are going into space tonight? No. 4 people are going into space. So let's take a look at the astronauts that are going up tonight, okay? All right, this was a picture taken just a little bit ago, you know, as they were preparing. There are the 4 of them gearing up. Actually, I need to show it to you. Bear with me. There are the 4 of them outside in front of Launch Complex 39A. Center, the 2 NASA astronauts. On the right, the astronaut from the United Arab Emirates. And on the left, from Russia, Roscosmos. That will be the spot in just mere hours that the 4 of them go to space. And what's fantastic is that of this crew manifest of 4, only 1 of them has ever gone to space before. Let's take a minute and introduce you to one of the new NASA astronauts. This is Warren Hallberg. First mission to space. He graduated in the NASA astronaut class of 2017. So he's been in the astronaut corps for a while. This is just the first time his number was essentially pulled. And I put that he was born in 1985 for my own reference, just to make fun, because at the end of the day, and his nickname is Woody, by the way, at the end of the day, he's younger than I am. I'm sure it's probably happened, but maybe not all that often. I don't know. I think it's kind of one of those interesting little tidbits. Yeah. So that's Woody. Woody was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You've got to believe that the guy is excited, right? You've got to wonder as they're waking up, like what's going through his mind right now? What's going through his mind right now? Very fun. All right, the second NASA astronaut, and these are the 2 that we're going to focus on tonight. Stephen Bowen, okay? He's the commander on this mission. A couple of interesting tidbits. So he flew on 3 space shuttle missions, STS-126, STS-132, STS-133. What I think is kind of fun is it is his 2nd time on Endeavour. And when I say that, I have to put an asterisk. He flew on Space Shuttle Endeavour, and now he's flying on Dragon Capsule Endeavour. He's not the first one to do that, by the way. Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, both first time, they were the test pilots, essentially, for Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. They also flew on this capsule and flew on Space Shuttle Endeavour. So that's kind of a fun little tidbit. I love that. I love that nerdiness. So, Stephen Bowen. He's the first submariner ever to be selected and added to the astronaut corps, but the 2nd submariner to fly in space. One thing that's neat is that as these, and this is just a shot from inside the Crew Endeavour capsule, but each and every time this Endeavour capsule goes up to space, the crews put those patches in there, and I think that that's so fun. I think that that's so fascinating. There's Bob and Doug. You've got Demo 2 on the left side. That's their patch. Then in the center, that's Crew 2 going up to the International Space Station. And then following that is the Axiom launch. Pat, you and I covered Axiom. Yeah. I feel like we covered Crew 2 also. We didn't cover Demo 2. That was the height of the pandemic. That was before we started really getting out here. Because I remember doing Facebook Live at the station for it. Yeah. Anyway, so tonight, I don't know if the crew for Crew 6, which would be tonight's launch, goes and puts the patch up before or after. But that's just kind of one of those little fun facts that they get to do. Debbie says, I need to call each and every one of you to wake you up. I'm going to barely be awake myself at the end of the day. Last time that the Endeavour capsule went up to space was just under a year ago. And what's kind of interesting is, as of the manifest of Dragon capsules, Endeavour has spent the most time in space and in orbit. So very cool stuff. Deanne is asking, what time is it supposed to launch? We are at a 1:45 a.m. liftoff. So we've got a lot of time for that. Got a lot of time for that. 1:45 in the morning. So a couple of housekeeping notes, at least for our coverage on WESH 2. Out here in the lab, we'll be live at 10. We'll be live at 11. And then in addition to that, we will also have special live coverage at 1:30 in the morning. Jason Guy waking up particularly early, and Luana Munoz will be working with Jason Guy anchoring that special coverage. All right, so that's kind of where we're at. All right, let's talk a little bit about the vehicle that's going up today. This is, as we mentioned, it's the Endeavour capsule. Okay, on the top, first flown Demo 2, last flown with Axiom. I mentioned about a year ago, 300, and I believe it's 320 days that it's been here on the ground. The Falcon 9 booster that's taking to orbit today is a brand new one, and that is a particular rarity. Don't really run into that all that often. You usually don't get new boosters. Yeah. This is a brand new, and what you're looking at, that image there, is actually the booster. That's actually a photograph from earlier as it was on its stand. Yeah. A couple of facts about the vehicle itself. Falcon 9 stands just about 230 feet tall. Now, that's hard to imagine the height, but that's about the height of our WESH 2 Studios tower. Okay, so that's a landmark. Maybe, certainly, many people have driven by there. So if you have, our tower with the Doppler radar on it is about as tall as a Falcon 9. It's 12 feet wide, okay, and it is propelled by 9 Merlin engines, putting out 190,000 pounds of thrust at sea level, okay? And all of that is to push up to the incredible speed of 17,500 miles per hour. Now, I did see somebody mentioning that Dragon capsule doesn't look like it has much room inside of it. It really doesn't. Here's another picture, kind of just to give you an idea. That's kind of, one little area of it. But anybody have an idea of the volume inside a Dragon capsule? Pat, do you have an idea?
No.
No, he easily says no. All right, so 328 cubic feet, because you have to think three-dimensionally, right? Because it's not like a house where this is where you're walking. 328 cubic feet. Now, this is not designed for people to be inside for a very long period of time. They get to the International Space Station. Certainly, there's more room, but only 328 cubic feet. One thing that's interesting, we've only had, and maybe I'm misremembering here, but we've only ever had crews of 4 going in the Dragon capsule. But SpaceX publishes that the capacity is 7. 7 people in 328 cubic feet. Now, remember, that means, you know, it's only 12 feet wide, right? Remember, the diameter of the rocket's only 12. So you're talking 12 feet wide by, you know, mathematics, carry the 2. You know, it's a depth thing. The good news is these astronauts are not staying in that section for very long. It takes about a day or so to get to the International Space Station. So there's a lot of that, you know. Rosebud says so, a little more than 20 stories tall. Yeah, that's the idea there. Yeah. All right. Question so far. Joseph says I believe it can hold up to 7 astronauts. That's correct. I thought that was particularly interesting. Yeah. All right. So that said, what's going on here? Well, they're going to get to the International Space Station. All kinds of scientific experiments. There's some 200 or so scientific experiments that this crew is going to be working on at the International Space Station. And at the end of this mission, it comes back and lands, splashes down off the coastline here of Florida. Now, that said, once this gets up, they'll do the crew handoff as they always do, and Crew 5 will splash down off the coast of Florida, and then in about 6 months we'll have Crew 7, and they'll go and they'll do their thing. So kind of fun. I think that's kind of fun stuff. All right, so we had talked about launch trajectory a little bit. Let's get into that, because the weather here at the Kennedy Space Center is looking fantastic. But once we lift off from Launch Complex 39A, the vehicle accelerates and starts moving downrange. It doesn't just go straight up. It kind of starts going out to sea for safety purposes, and also because in the event of an anomaly, which, God forbid, but in the event of that, it gives the Dragon capsule the ability to blast away from Falcon 9 and then parachute to a landing. This is a vehicle that is designed to land in the ocean. So, God forbid there's an issue, there's a launch escape system that blasts it away from the rocket and safely lands it into the ocean. And that's why it starts heading downrange, and the shuttle did the same thing. Starts heading downrange and actually goes well off the shoreline, but skirting the United States shoreline. So what's really neat is that folks living up and down the eastern seaboard should be able to see some parts of this, right? At about 8 or so minutes into the mission, the first stage will attempt a landing on the Just Read the Instructions drone ship. SpaceX has done this many, many times. This is the first time this booster has flown. Many times. I mean, they have boosters that have flown 10, 11, 12 times. Okay, so kind of one of those neat things that SpaceX alone does. But as it continues to climb and to climb, pushing to 17,500 miles per hour, it kind of skirts up the Nova Scotia coastline there, and then eventually continues up over like Ireland, Spain, Portugal, okay? But the entire corridor there highlighted in white has to have acceptable weather, because in the event of an anomaly and it parachutes down to the ocean, Coast Guard has to go get them, right? Or the Navy has to go get them, or, you know, just depending on where. So that's very important. And this plays in particularly for crewed missions, right? Because there are 4 souls on board. So it's a very important element there. But at least the weather locally looking fantastic. The weather along the corridors looking fine for now. So we'll keep that trend going. I think that we're going to be just fine. All right? Any questions, comments, concerns about this? before we wrap up tonight. Just wanted to pop on here and share at least some nerdiness with you before we get into our TV coverage and all of that fun stuff, right? 95% chance of good weather. Of course, we'll have live team coverage starting on WESH 2 News at 10, WESH 2 News at 11, and special coverage in the morning at 1:30. Good gravy. Is that going to be early? Good gravy. Is that going to be early? Yeah. All right. Ask Kenneth, he knows a little something about everything. Oh, yeah. Debbie says, I'll have to tell my son he's in New York to look for it. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's going to be early, but why not? Sidebar, you think that the rockets are the only big things here at the Kennedy Space Center? Let me tell you something. The mosquitoes, they're getting into my shirt. Like, how does that happen? Joseph says, I think NASA requires a new booster for each crew launch. Then these boosters are used for other launches. So, Joseph, I thought the same thing. But I'm pretty sure, and give me 2 seconds and I'll check here. I'm pretty sure that there have been recycles. Yeah, I'll have to look. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that they have had. I know at least at the very beginning that they did, but I thought that they started reusing boosters, but we'll see. Yeah. Michael's asking, how do they decide what time to launch the rocket? That's a great question. So you have to think of it like this. The International Space Station is orbiting around the Earth, okay? In addition to that, you have to get this spacecraft to orbit and to catch up with the ISS, right? So think of it like this. You've got a bow and arrow, and you're trying to hit your target. As a mosquito flies into my eyeball. But what if your target's moving? You have to make calculations so that when you let that bow and arrow, when you let that arrow go, it hits the target. That's exactly what's happening, and that's rocket science at the end of the day. And so essentially, they want to get that corridor. They want to have that ascent or climb corridor just so that they can stay close enough to land so that if there's anomalies, that folks from the eastern seaboard can go out and rescue the crew, essentially. So it all comes down to that. It all they would calculate this the exact same way if it was space shuttle, etc., etc., etc. We could have coffee right now. We're going to need it to stay awake. Yeah, I definitely have. I definitely have some coffee, and I think after this broadcast, I'm going to go get some. Debbie, my son is a true nerd. He can stay up really late in the computer, and then get up by 7. I used to be able to do the same thing. Taylor says it's Florida. The state bird is the mosquitoes. That's true. I would agree with that, right?
This used to be called Mosquito County.
This used to be called Mosquito County. You're right. I did read that somewhere. Yeah. Good stuff. Like Skeet, but on a much more grand level. Yep. Yep. All right. That's all I got, people. So I'll be live tweeting and updating you throughout. And, and I may pop on this live shot from time to time just to do a quick Facebook Live and chat about it. It's beautiful out here. And I'm really happy to say that the weather tonight is looking just fantastic. All right? Listen, have a great night. We will see you throughout for special coverage on WESH 2 News at 10 on CW18 and 11 on WESH 2. Take care, guys.